Case number 1. Jovan Trevino, July 19, 2021, Clark County. Henderson, Nevada is the kind of city people choose on purpose. It sits just southeast of Las Vegas, a planned community of tidy subdivisions, good schools, and manicured parks. Families move there for the safety of it, for the quiet, for the feeling that the chaos of the Strip is close enough to visit but far enough away to forget. It is the kind of place where neighbors wave from driveways, where children ride bikes in cul-de-sacs, and where the sound of a child's laughter drifting through an open window is so ordinary that nobody thinks twice about it. Nobody thought twice about the home on Calamus Palm Place, either. Not until the afternoon of Monday, July 19, 2021, when Christopher Fox came home from work and walked into a silence that would destroy every version of his life he had ever imagined for himself. Christopher Fox was the father of 2 children. A 4-year-old boy named Christopher Fox III, who was imaginative and kind-hearted, who loved with a warmth that his father would later describe in a courtroom with a voice cracked open by grief. And a 1-year-old girl named Diaja Fox, who her mother would one day describe, in that same courtroom, in circumstances none of them could have predicted, as free-spirited, self-assured, and curious. 2 children, separated in age by 3 years, close as siblings are close when they are young enough that the world is still mostly each other. What Christopher Fox found when he arrived home that evening was not a family. It was the aftermath of something so incomprehensible that it took investigators, prosecutors, and a judge years to work through the full weight of it. His 2 children, his 4-year-old son and his 1-year-old daughter, were found dead, each in a bathtub, each drowned. Their mother, 38-year-old Jovan Trevino, had drowned them individually, holding each of their heads beneath the water. She had done this on the same day, in the same house, and then she had waited. And when Christopher Fox came home, he found his babies floating. Jovan Trevino was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for each of her children. Prosecutors initially pursued the death penalty. It was that kind of case. The kind where the state looks at the facts and concludes that the ordinary range of punishment simply is not adequate to account for what happened. 2 children, 2 bathtubs, 1 afternoon. But there was a legal process to work through, and that process took years. During that time, the community grappled with the question that always follows a crime like this one, the question of how. How does a mother do this? How does a woman who carried these children, who held them when they were newborns, who knew their personalities and their habits and the sounds of their laughter, how does she hold their heads underwater? The arrest report offered a partial and deeply unsatisfying answer. Trevino told police that before she drowned her children, she had taken a sleeping aid, consumed beer, and taken a shot of tequila. Whether that was meant to explain, or to excuse, or simply to describe what she remembered, the record did not say. What the record did say was that the children were dead, and she was the one who killed them. There had been warning signs. An investigation by the local I-team revealed that in the days before Christopher and Diaja were found dead, there had been prior reports to authorities, allegations of neglect that had been looked into and not escalated. That revelation added a layer of institutional anguish to the personal devastation. Could someone have intervened? Could a different decision by a caseworker or an officer in the days before July 19, 2021, have changed what happened to those 2 children? Those questions have no clean answers, and they have haunted the case ever since. In the years that followed, as the legal proceedings wound their way through Clark County courts, Jovan Trevino eventually entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of first-degree murder. She gave up her right to a trial. She gave up any claim to argue the facts. And in doing so, she avoided the death penalty as part of her plea agreement, agreeing instead to the sentence that the court would impose. That sentence came on Tuesday, May 12, 2026. The courtroom at the Regional Justice Center in Las Vegas was filled. Christopher Fox was there. His mother, Shauna Fox, the children's grandmother, was there. Jovan Trevino's brothers were there. Witnesses to a moment of reckoning none of them could have imagined when those children were alive. Shauna Fox spoke first. She had raised a son who came home from work to find his babies dead in their bathtubs, and she had spent nearly 5 years watching the legal system move at its own agonizing pace toward this moment. When she got to speak, she did not soften a single word. She told Trevino that she had acted selfishly and had failed miserably as a mother. She told her that the cruelty of leaving those children floating for their father to find when he came home from work was unthinkable. And then she said, "I hope you see their little faces every time you close your eyes, and I hope you never forgive yourself for stealing their futures." Christopher Fox spoke about his children. He asked the court to remember Christopher and Johanna as the joyous, loving children they were. "Nothing else," he said. "Just that." And then Jovan Trevino spoke. She addressed the courtroom and described what she had done. Her voice, witnesses said, full of emotion. "On Monday, July 19th, 2021, my baby's precious, innocent lives were taken at the hands of their mommy," she said. She called herself their mommy. She described them in the terms that the people who loved them most used. Christopher, imaginative and kind-hearted. Johanna, free-spirited and curious. She said they should be alive, attending elementary school, involved in sports, visiting family, getting ready for summer plans. Christopher, she noted, would be turning 10 years old. Johanna would have been 5. She also asked anyone in the room who had ever heard someone express suicidal thoughts to get that person help immediately. The request landed strangely in a room where her children's father had just spoken about finding those children dead. District Judge Carly Kearney sentenced Jovan Trevino to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each child she drowned. As Trevino was led from the courtroom, she turned and blew a kiss to her brothers. Judge Kearney, before handing down the sentence, had a message for the defendant. "I know that as you live out the rest of your life in a jail cell, you'll probably think about this case often," she said. "I will remember your case forever. So will the state of Nevada. So will the family Christopher Fox built in the love he had for his children. A family that was taken from him on an ordinary Monday afternoon in a Henderson home where the only sounds were the ones no parent should ever have to imagine." Christopher Fox, 3, was 4 years old. Johanna Fox was 1 year old. They deserved a summer. They deserved 10 years old in elementary school and joyous and loving and everything their father said they were. They got a Monday in July, and a mother who made a choice that cannot be undone. If this story moved you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Advocate. These children's stories deserve to be told, and your support helps us keep telling them. Leave a comment below. Let us know you're here for Christopher and Johanna. Case number 2, Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez, May 24th, 2021, Clark County. There is a hiking trail in the mountains west of Las Vegas, out along State Route 160, where the desert begins to climb into something rougher and wilder than the valley floor. The Mountain Springs trailhead sits roughly 30 miles from the Strip, far enough that the glitter of the city disappears entirely and the silence of the Mojave fills the space instead. People drive out there to clear their heads, to breathe, to remember that Nevada is bigger than casinos and neon. On the morning of May 28, 2021, a group of hikers found a child's body hidden behind a bush, roughly 8 feet off the trail. He was naked. He showed multiple signs of physical injury. He was alone in the desert in a way that no child should ever be alone anywhere, because he had been left there, deliberately, by someone who knew him. For more than a week, authorities did not know who he was. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department and the FBI issued public appeals. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created a composite rendering of the boy's face. Investigators named him John Doe and gave him a nickname, Little Zion, in hopes that someone, somewhere, would recognize him and come forward. The tips poured in, hundreds of them, and on June 7, 2021, they got the answer they needed. The boy in the desert was 7-year-old Liam Husted, a special needs child from San Jose, California, who adored his father and who his grandfather would later describe as a happy, sweet, innocent child. And the person who left him there was his mother. Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez had left San Jose with Liam on May 24, 2021. She did not tell Liam's father where they were going. She left a voicemail that said, "I'm sorry I had to do it like this," a message ambiguous enough that Liam's father, when he came home to find them gone, did not immediately suspect violence. He contacted police on June 1st. By then, his son had already been dead for days. Moreno-Rodriguez drove with Liam through Southern California, through Laguna Beach and Victorville, before arriving in Las Vegas. She and Liam checked into a Las Vegas hotel on May 27th. the day before his body was found on the trail. What happened in that hotel room, or on the way to the trailhead, became the subject of a confession that prosecutors would later describe in stark, clinical terms. According to Clark County Deputy District Attorney John Giordani, Moreno-Rodriguez admitted that she had become frustrated with Liam and strangled him. The Clark County coroner confirmed through specialized testing that Liam Husted died by strangulation, and that the strangulation was prolonged, lasting more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The coroner ruled the death a homicide. Moreno-Rodriguez removed her son's clothes, carried his body to the desert trail, hid it behind a bush, and drove away. She was later found in Denver, Colorado, at a hotel, accompanied by an unidentified man. She was arrested by an FBI task force in Denver on June 8, 2021. Extradited to Nevada. Indicted by a Clark County grand jury. Charged with murder. The DNA work was meticulous. Investigators flew to San Jose, obtained samples from a hoodie and a pillow belonging to Liam, and matched them to the child found on the trail. By the time the match was confirmed, a nation had already come to know Liam Husted as Little Zion, a child without a name who had somehow burrowed into the collective consciousness through sheer vulnerability. His grandfather's statement was brief and devastating. "We are devastated," Chris Husted said. Liam was a happy, sweet, innocent child who adored his father. It is a complete tragedy. Liam was a special needs child, at a disadvantage and dependent on others' kindness. Dependent on others' kindness. Dependent, most of all, on his mother. Samantha Moreno-Rodriguez entered a guilty plea agreement on September 1, 2022, pleading guilty to murder and child abuse. She was sentenced to serve a minimum of 28 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. She will not walk free until Liam Husted, had he lived, would have been well into his adulthood. The case became one of the most widely covered child homicide cases in Nevada history, in part because of the weeks that Liam spent in the public's awareness without a name. There is something particularly haunting about a child who is known to the world before he is identified. A child whose face was reconstructed by artists and distributed across the country in the hope that someone would say, "Yes, I know that boy. I know who he belongs to." Because every child belongs to someone. The tragedy is when the person they belong to is the one who ends them. Liam Husted was 7 years old. He adored his father. He was happy and sweet and innocent and deserving of every year that was stolen from him on a desert trail outside Las Vegas, in a state that will carry the weight of his case for a very long time. Thank you for watching True Crime Advocate. If you believe Liam's story deserves to be heard, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a case. Drop a comment and let us know you're standing with Liam. Case 3. Jessica McCarty. March 19, 2015, Brevard County, Florida. The call came in at approximately 3 in the morning. 3 in the morning carries its own particular weight in the geography of true crime. It is the hour of deepest sleep, the furthest point in any 24-hour cycle from the ordinary rhythms and logic of a daylight life. It is the hour when the distance between what is and what should be sometimes collapses entirely. It is the hour when people who have reached the absolute end of something, whatever that something is, pick up a phone and make calls they will not be able to take back. On March 19, 2015, a woman named Jessica McCarty, 33 years old, a resident of Palm Bay, Florida, called the police in those small and darkest hours and told the dispatcher, who answered, that she had killed her children. All 3 of them. Officers responding to the home found Jessica McCarty standing outside the residence. She was holding a butcher knife. She was not in flight. She was not frantic or incoherent or frantically trying to explain herself. She was standing there, outside the house where her 3 children had just died, holding the knife, waiting for the people she had called to come. She had made the call. She had given the address. She was there when the squad cars arrived. Inside that home, law enforcement found exactly what Jessica McCarty had told them they would find. 7-year-old Lacey McCarty was dead. 6-year-old Philip McCarty was dead. And 5-month-old Christopher Swist, an infant who had been in the world for only 5 months, who had never taken a single step or formed a single sentence, who had barely had time to become fully himself before he was taken, was also dead. All 3 children had been strangled. Their mother had placed her hands around each of their throats, one after another. In the hours before she made that call, and she had ended each of their lives with the sustained physical effort that strangulation requires. Palm Bay, Florida, sits in Brevard County on the Atlantic coast of the state, a city of more than 100,000 residents where most people build and live quiet, ordinary lives. When news of what had happened inside that house on that March night reached the community, the response was the specific kind of devastation that comes from proximity, not the detached horror of tragedy seen from a distance, but the raw, close, personal grief of people who drive past that street, who know that neighborhood, who live their own quiet lives in the same city where this happened behind a door that looked like every other door. The question that follows every case of this nature with absolute persistence is the question of why. Why did a mother move through the rooms of her house in the middle of the night on March 19, 2015, and take the life of each of her children in turn? What had been building toward that point, and for how long, and why did it end in this particular way rather than any other? The answers that emerged through investigation pointed toward a woman in severe psychological distress in the period before the murders. The specific nature of that distress, what she had been experiencing, for how long, what warning signs may or may not have been visible to those around her, was examined in the legal proceedings that followed. Those examinations exist in court records and are part of the documented history of the case. But the honest truth is that no clinical or legal accounting of Jessica McCarty's state of mind in the weeks before March 19 fully resolves the fundamental wrongness of what was done to Lacey and Philip and Christopher. Explanations exist. They do not make it all right. They do not bring 3 children back. They do not transform a tragedy into something that can be neatly filed away and understood. What the circumstances of that early March morning do establish clearly is that Jessica McCarty acted with a degree of deliberateness that sits uneasily alongside any simple narrative of a woman entirely overtaken by impulse. She did not call 911 in the immediate aftermath of a single explosive moment. She completed what she had started. She went outside. She held the knife. She made the call. She waited. These are not the behavioral patterns of someone who was completely overwhelmed and lost in chaos. These are the patterns of someone who did what she intended to do and then accepted the consequences. In December 2015, 9 months after the murders on March 19, Jessica McCarty appeared before the court and entered guilty pleas to all 3 counts of murder for the deaths of Lacey, Philip, and Christopher. There was no extended trial. No competing expert testimony about psychological states. No jury left to deliberate the impossible. She pled guilty. The sentence was 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Not concurrent, served simultaneously, but consecutive, meaning one stacked on top of another, stacked on top of the third. 3 life sentences for 3 children. Jessica McCarty will never leave prison. The sentence was designed to ensure that she would not. Lacey McCarty was 7 years old. She was in school. She had a life made up of the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable details that make up a 7-year-old's existence. The things she liked, the games she played, the way she laughed, the things that scared her at night, the things she was looking forward to. Philip McCarty was 6 years old, 1 year younger than his sister, probably just beginning the stretch of childhood where the world is big and full, and every day holds something new worth investigating. And Christopher Swist was 5 months old. 5 months. He had barely arrived. He was still in the stage of life where he was primarily just learning that he was a person, that the world was a place, that the faces around him were specific and beloved in his. All 3 of them died in Palm Bay, Florida, on March 19, 2015, strangled in the night in their own home, at the hands of their mother. The conversation that cases like this one demand, about mental health support, about crisis intervention, about the systems and people who are supposed to recognize when someone is approaching a breaking point and intervene before it becomes irreversible. That conversation is a necessary one. It should happen. It should happen constantly and loudly, because the goal must always be to prevent the next case from becoming the case that has to be documented. But that conversation must never be allowed to crowd out the most essential and irreducible truth at the center of this story. 3 children are gone. Lacey and Philip and Christopher deserved full lives. They deserved to grow up. They deserved to find out who they were going to be. And they did not get any of it. This is True Crime Advocate, and we are here because these children deserve witnesses. If you are watching this channel for the first time, welcome. Please subscribe right now so you never miss a documentary. If you have been with us, thank you for being here. Like this video, share it with someone who cares about true crime, and leave a comment below. Let us keep going. Case 4. Julie Skinecker. January 28, 2011. Hillsborough County, Florida. She called it a Saturday massacre. Those were her own words, written in her own handwriting, in a notebook that police would recover at the scene. Julie Skinecker, 50 years old, the wife of a United States Army colonel, a resident of the upscale Tampa Palms neighborhood of Tampa, Florida, had written out what she intended to do before she did it. She had given it a name. She had committed the plan to paper with enough advanced deliberation to develop a title for it. A Saturday massacre. Then she carried it out. On a Thursday, as it happened. The day apparently shifted from the original plan and the execution, but the plan itself, the intent, the decision, had existed before January 28, 2011. It had been written down. Julie Skinecker's 2 children were named Beau and Calix. Beau was 13 years old. Calix was 16. They were teenagers in the middle of all the specific turbulence and beauty and confusion of being teenagers, old enough to have opinions and personalities and the beginnings of their own interior worlds, young enough to still need their parents in ways they would never fully articulate. They were growing up inside a life that, from the outside, looked every bit like the kind of stable, comfortable, successful American existence that most families work hard to build. Their father was a colonel in the Army. They lived in Tampa Palms, which is exactly the kind of neighborhood the name suggests: manicured, ordered, quiet, the landscaped respectability of upper-middle-class American suburban life. Nothing about the outside of that life would have caught your attention if you had driven past it. But inside the house on Avila Road, something had been deteriorating for a long time. Julie Skinecker had a documented history of mental health difficulties that preceded January 28th by years. She had been prescribed psychiatric medications. She had been drinking heavily. The marriage carried its own tensions, shaped in part by the extended absences that military life demands. And in the weeks and months before that January morning, something in Julie Skinecker's interior world had apparently reached a point where she made a decision, not in a moment of sudden, uncontrollable impulse, but over time, with enough premeditation to write it down and give it a name, that the most permanent available solution was the right one. On the evening of January 27, 2011, the night before the murders, Julie Skinecker drove to a gun shop and purchased a .38 caliber handgun. She was not flagged by any system. She passed the background checks required by law. She brought the weapon home to Avila Road. She had it the next morning when she put 13-year-old Beau in the family car to drive him to soccer practice. Beau Skinecker loved soccer. He was 13. That particular and wonderful age when athletic passion and competitive drive and the desire to be genuinely good at something physical all combine into an energy that is wonderful to be around, that defines a kid's identity and fills their after-school hours and gives their week structure and purpose. He got into the car that Thursday morning to go to practice. He did not make it there. Somewhere on that drive, before the soccer field ever came into view, Julie Skinecker pulled out the handgun she had purchased the previous evening and shot her 13-year-old son in the face. Beau Skinecker died in that car. His mother drove home. Back at the house on Avila Road, 16-year-old Calix Skinecker was sitting at the dining room table doing her homework. She was home on what should have been an ordinary Thursday morning. She had her schoolwork in front of her. She was doing the kind of conscientious, unremarkable thing that parents generally hope their teenagers will do. Sitting down with the work, getting it done. She had no warning. There was no confrontation, no argument, no moment in which she could have understood what was coming through the door behind her mother. Julie Skinecker shot Calix in the back of the head while her daughter sat at the dining room table with her homework spread out in front of her. Then Julie Skinecker went to bed. She was found the following morning, January 29, 2011, by her own mother, who had become concerned after being unable to reach anyone in the household and had come to check on the family in person. Parker Skinecker, the children's father, who had also been trying to make contact and had notified authorities, was not in Tampa at the time. When law enforcement arrived at the house on Avila Road, they found Julie Skinecker inside, still wearing her pajamas, in an impaired and disheveled state. They found Beau's body in the car parked outside the house. They found Calix at the dining room table, her homework still in front of her, exactly where she had been sitting when her mother came in from behind. The notebook in which Julie Skinecker had written her plan became one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the prosecution's case. The written plan demonstrated premeditation with a clarity that the defense could not easily argue around. You cannot claim that a person did not know what they were doing when that person wrote down what they were going to do and gave it a name in advance. The prosecution argued that the plan, the naming of the plan, the purchase of the weapon the evening before, and the execution of the plan across two separate locations on two separate children constituted premeditated, first-degree murder. The defense argued mental illness. Julie Skinecker's attorneys presented evidence of her documented psychiatric history, her medication regimen, her alcohol use, and the overall deterioration of her mental state in the period leading up to the murders. They argued that at the time of the killings, her judgment and her capacity to form the criminal intent required for first-degree murder had been compromised beyond the legal threshold of culpability. The prosecution countered that all of this was contradicted by the most fundamental fact available. She had written down what she was going to do before she did it. The jury, in May 2014, more than 3 years after the murders on January 28th, returned verdicts of guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. 2 concurrent life sentences were imposed. Julie Skinecker will die in a Florida prison. Parker Skinecker, the children's father, addressed the court at sentencing with the particular, devastating dignity of a man who has lost his children and now has to stand in a room and speak about it in formal language to a judge. He spoke about who Bo and Calix had been, not as victims in a case, not as names in a legal file, but as people. Specific, irreplaceable, particular people with their own ways of being in the world, their own things they loved, their own futures that were supposed to happen and now would not. Bo Skinecker was 13 and loved soccer. He was in that car on the way to practice when his life ended. Calix Skinecker was 16 and was doing her homework at the dining room table when she was shot from behind. Their mother told investigators she killed them because they were mouthy, because they talked back, because they exhibited the ordinary, infuriating, completely universal teenage behavior of being teenagers in the vicinity of a parent who was having a difficult time. Every teenager in the world talks back. Every parent in the history of the world has had to navigate it. It is not a reason. It never was. It never will be. Thank you for staying with True Crime Advocate through Case 4. These stories are not easy to hear, and they are not easy to tell. If this documentary is serving you, serving the memory of these children, please like this video right now, subscribe to True Crime Advocate, and drop a comment below. We are halfway through 10 cases. Let us keep going. 5. Sharice Stinson. September 1st, 2018, Pinellas County, Florida. His name was Jordan Bello, and he was 2 years old, and he loved his mother the way 2-year-olds always love their mothers, with the total, unguarded, instinctive trust of a small person who does not yet have any reason to protect his heart from anything. On September 1st, 2018, Sharice Stinson, 21 years old, a resident of Largo, Florida, called 911 and reported that her son had been kidnapped. She told the operator and then the officers who responded that she and Jordan had been approached by a man while they were out, that this man had attacked her and knocked her unconscious, and that when she came to, Jordan was gone. She had a name for the man. She called him Antoine. She was distressed in the way that a mother whose child has just been stolen should be distressed. She needed help. She needed the police to move fast, because her baby was out there with a stranger and every second mattered. Pinellas County authorities deployed every tool they had at their disposal. A statewide Amber Alert was issued for Jordan Bello. His name, his age, his physical description, the urgency of the situation broadcast across the entire state of Florida to every driver on every highway, to every cell phone, to every television set and radio, in every home and car. Law enforcement searched for the man named Antoine. They ran the name. They canvassed neighborhoods. They pursued every lead that Sharice Stinson's account generated. The system mobilized for a missing 2-year-old child in the way it is supposed to. There was no Antoine. There never had been. 3 days later, on September 4th, 2018, searchers found Jordan Bello's body in a wooded area near a recreational center in Largo, Florida. He had been partially buried. He was 2 years old. He had been there, in that ground in those woods, since the night his mother called police to report him missing. When investigators confronted Cherise Stinson with the evidence assembled across those 3 days, the inconsistencies in her account, the physical evidence, the impossibilities in her stated timeline, she eventually abandoned the fiction of Antoine and told investigators what had actually happened. She told them she had struck Jordan across the face. She used the word frustration to describe what had led to the moment, a word that lands almost obscenely inadequate when placed next to what it is being asked to describe. She hit her 2-year-old son in the face. The force of the blow caused his head to impact against a wall. Jordan collapsed. And rather than calling for emergency medical help, rather than picking up the same phone she would later use to invent a kidnapper, and instead calling 911 for her injured son, the way any parent in any real emergency does, Cherise Stinson made a different decision. She decided to conceal what had happened. She moved Jordan's body. She drove to that wooded area near the recreational center in Largo. She partially buried her 2-year-old son in the ground. She returned home, and then she called 911 and told them about Antoine. The autopsy of Jordan Bello told investigators a story that extended beyond a single blow and a single wall on a single night. The medical examiner's findings were extensive, and they were devastating. Blunt force trauma, a skull fracture, a brain hemorrhage, a broken leg, deep lacerations. The picture assembled by those findings was not the picture of a child who suffered one isolated injury from one isolated incident. It was the picture of a child who had sustained serious, significant harm on more than one occasion before the night of September 1, 2018. Jordan Bello was 2 years old. He had curly hair and a toddler's laugh and all the small, ordinary, irreplaceable qualities of a 2-year-old child who is just beginning to understand what kind of world he has arrived in. He was buried in the ground in Largo, Florida, while his name flashed across Amber Alert screens on every highway in the state, and his mother told police she needed them to find him. Cherise Stinson was charged with second-degree murder. In October 2020, 2 years after Jordan's death, she pleaded guilty. The sentence was 50 years in prison. She will be deep into her 70s before any question of release becomes relevant, if it ever does. But Jordan Bello left something behind him. In the aftermath of his death, advocates and lawmakers and members of the community who were haunted by what had happened to him pushed for meaningful reform of the systems in Florida responsible for monitoring the welfare and safety of children who may be at risk. The result of that effort was legislation that carries his name, Jordan's Law, designed to strengthen child welfare oversight in Florida, to ensure earlier intervention, better communication, and more accountable monitoring of children in vulnerable situations. Jordan's Law exists because a 2-year-old boy died who should not have died, and because the people who were moved by his death refused to let the system remain unchanged. His name is on a law now. He never got to learn what a law was. He was 2 years old. He trusted his mother completely, and his mother buried him in the woods and called 911 and told them a man named Antoine had taken him. There was no Antoine. There was never any Antoine. Jordan Bello deserved better. Every child on this list deserved better. If True Crime Advocate is helping you understand and remember their stories, please show us by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below. We read every single comment, and your support means more to this channel than you know. Case 6 is one of the most haunting on this entire list. Stay with us. Case 6. Geraldine Graham. January 2001, Miami-Dade County, Florida. Rillia Wilson disappeared in January of 2001, and the state of Florida, the agency officially responsible for her safety, the institutional structure of professionals and caseworkers and protocols that was supposed to stand between her and harm, did not notice she was gone for more than a year. More than a year. Think about what that means. A 4-year-old child, in the official care of the Florida Department of Children and Families, vanished from the home of her state-appointed caretaker and was not reported missing by any official body, was not flagged as absent in any system that was supposed to be tracking her welfare, was not the subject of any search or inquiry for 12 full months and more. During all of that time, the world went on around the absence of Rillia Wilson as though she had simply never existed. She had existed. She existed fully and specifically and as a person, the way every child exists, with a personality, a face, a voice, particular ways of moving through the world that were entirely her own. She was 4 years old. She was a foster child who had entered Florida's child welfare system through the kind of difficult, disrupted early circumstances that bring children to the state's care. She had been placed in the home of a woman named Geraldine Graham, who served as her caretaker. On paper, Relia Wilson had a safety net. She had a state agency monitoring her. She had caseworkers assigned to check on her situation. She had the entire professional machinery of Child Protective Services positioned between her and danger. The machinery failed. It failed completely and catastrophically, and for a duration that is staggering to contemplate even decades later. Relia Wilson disappeared from Geraldine Graham's home in Miami in January of 2001. It was not until the spring of 2002, more than 12 months later, that any official within the Department of Children and Families looked at the files, noted the absence, and asked the question that should have been asked within days of her disappearance. Where is this child? When DCF workers came to Geraldine Graham and asked that question, Graham had an answer ready. She told them that a DCF caseworker had come to her home and taken Relia. She described this worker. She provided details. She presented the story with the practiced confidence of someone who had known this question was eventually coming and had spent the intervening year deciding how to answer it. To anyone inclined to accept the story at face value, it could have sounded like a bureaucratic confusion, a file lost, a transfer not properly communicated, the kind of administrative breakdown that an overburdened and underfunded system might plausibly produce. It was not a bureaucratic confusion. Investigators who examined Graham's account found nothing to support it. No DCF caseworker had come to that home and taken Relia Wilson. No record of any such visit existed. No worker had any memory of any such action. The transfer Graham described had not happened. The story was a fabrication, constructed to explain the absence of a child who, the weight of subsequent evidence strongly suggests, was already dead by the time anyone in an official capacity began asking questions. As the investigation deepened over the months that followed, testimony began to accumulate that painted a disturbing picture of what Relia Wilson's life in Geraldine Graham's home had consisted of. Multiple women who were incarcerated alongside Graham after her arrest testified about conversations they had overheard or participated in with Graham in the jail environment. According to this testimony, Graham had spoken about Relia in terms that were deeply revealing. She had, multiple witnesses testified, spoken of smothering the child, of taking Relia's life with her own hands, because she had come to believe, through some internal reasoning that has never been satisfactorily explained to the outside world, that the 4-year-old girl was evil. That Relia Wilson, for years old, was possessed of some darkness that needed to be addressed through the most permanent possible means. There was also testimony and reporting that described Relia being confined in a dog cage as a form of punishment. A 4-year-old child, placed in an enclosure designed for an animal, locked inside it, as a disciplinary measure. The specific cruelty of that image, the deliberate degradation of placing a small child in a cage meant for a dog, the message it sends to a 4-year-old about her own worth and status in the household, sits in the imagination in a way that does not easily clear. Relia Wilson's body has never been found. That is a sentence that needs to stand on its own for a moment, because it is the heart of what makes this case one of the most haunting on this entire list. After everything, the investigation, the testimony, the trial, the conviction, the sentencing, Relia Wilson's remains have never been located. There is no grave to visit. There is no final resting place. There is a verdict and a prison sentence, but there is no physical closure of the kind that requires finding what was lost. Relia Wilson is still, officially, missing. She is presumed dead by every reasonable measure of evidence and probability, but she has not been found. Geraldine Graham was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated child abuse. The trial that eventually took place in 2013, 12 years after Relia disappeared, was complicated at its core by the absence of a body. Without Relia's remains, without forensic confirmation of cause of death, without the physical evidence that a recovered body provides, the prosecution was working from testimony and inference. The jury wrestled with the murder charge specifically and was unable to reach a unanimous verdict on it. The final tally was 11 jurors in favor of conviction and 1 holdout, an 11-to-1 deadlock that prevented the murder conviction from being entered. On the charges of kidnapping and aggravated child abuse, however, The jury convicted Geraldine Graham. The sentence was 55 years in prison. Given Graham's age at the time of sentencing, 55 years functions as a life sentence in practical terms. She will not leave prison in any meaningful sense. The case produced reforms in Florida's child welfare system that were, by any measure, long overdue. Legislation was passed in the wake of the Rillia-Wilson case, legislation that came to be known as the Rillia-Wilson Act, designed to improve the monitoring of children in the DCF system, reduce caseloads that had grown unmanageable, strengthen the accountability mechanisms meant to ensure that a child in state care could not disappear for 12 months without anyone noticing. The Rillia-Wilson Act carries her name into a future she never got to live. It is a small and complicated kind of tribute, the kind that nobody ever wanted to have to create, the kind that exists solely because a child was failed by every system that was supposed to protect her. It is justice in the most indirect and inadequate sense of the word. Rillia-Wilson was 4 years old. She had a face and a personality and a 4-year-old's particular way of being in the world. She was a foster child who had already been through more disruption than any 4-year-old should have to navigate, and she was placed in a home that was supposed to give her stability, and instead she was placed in a home with a woman who locked her in a dog cage and who, by the weight of testimony, decided that a 4-year-old child was evil and acted on that decision. She is still out there somewhere. 12 months passed before anyone officially noted she was gone. The person who put her there has been sentenced to 55 years. And Rillia-Wilson, 4 years old, has still not been found. We are asking you, as a viewer of True Crime Advocate, to take 30 seconds right now and like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Rillia-Wilson was never found. The least any of us can do is make sure her name continues to be spoken. Your subscription helps this channel keep speaking it. Case 7 is one of the most recent on this list, and it is one of the most deeply disturbing. Do not go anywhere. Case 7. Patricia Ortiz. 2022, Merced County Superior Court. In the small, quiet farming community of La Grande, in Merced County, California, a father came home one day in 2022 and found his 3 children dead. He had been out of the house. He had come back expecting the ordinary rhythms of family life. Noise, maybe dinner on the stove, the particular chaos of a household with young children. What he found instead was a scene of absolute devastation. Ana Ortiz Lara was 8 years old. Mateo Ortiz Lara was 5 years old. Alexa Ortiz Lara was 3 years old. All 3 were dead. Their mother, Patricia Ortiz, had suffocated them. La Grande is a small, unincorporated community in Merced County, a stretch of California's Central Valley where agriculture is the primary industry and where communities are close-knit in the way that small agricultural towns tend to be. When something like this happens in a place like La Grande, it does not just devastate a family. It reverberates through an entire community in a way that larger, more anonymous cities sometimes do not experience in the same visceral way. Everyone in La Grande knew something. Everyone in La Grande had a neighbor or a coworker or a child in school with someone connected to this family. The grief was collective in a way that was both profound and completely inadequate to the scale of what had happened. When law enforcement arrived at the Ortiz home in La Grande, they found the 3 children deceased. They also found Patricia Ortiz in the bathroom. She had attempted to take her own life and had survived. She was taken into custody after receiving medical treatment for her self-inflicted injuries. The investigation that followed confirmed what the physical evidence suggested. Patricia Ortiz had suffocated all 3 of her children. The manner of death for each child was ruled asphyxiation, consistent with manual or positional suffocation. Investigators and mental health professionals who subsequently evaluated Ortiz were confronted with a woman who had survived a serious self-harm attempt, suggesting that whatever had occurred in that home on that day, she had not anticipated or planned for her own continuation beyond it. Cases in which a parent kills their children and then attempts to take their own life are classified by criminologists and mental health professionals as a particular and distinct subcategory of familicide, sometimes called extended suicide, in which the perpetrator's psychological state is one of such profound hopelessness and despair that they see no future for themselves or their children and attempt to end both simultaneously. That clinical framework exists. It has descriptive and even explanatory value. It does not, and cannot, and should not, function as legal exculpation for the deaths of Ana, Mateo, and Alesha. California law does not provide a defense of despair. California law provides for the consideration of mental state in determining charges and penalties, but the deaths of 3 children at the hands of their mother remain. Under California law, first-degree murder unless there is evidence that the defendant did not understand what she was doing or did not understand it was wrong. Patricia Ortiz was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder in Merced County Superior Court. The prosecution of her case moved through the court system in Merced County, a jurisdiction that is not accustomed to cases of this magnitude, and that was required to draw on significant additional resources, legal, investigative, and forensic, to process it appropriately. The case generated coverage from the Merced Sun-Star and ABC 30 Fresno, and was followed closely by child welfare organizations throughout the Central Valley. The outcome of Patricia Ortiz's case stands as a permanent legal record in Merced County. A mother who came home to La Grande one day, or a father who left and returned to find his 3 children gone. 3 small human beings who woke up that morning as 8-year-old Anna, 5-year-old Mateo, and 3-year-old Alesha. Children who were learning things and growing and doing the ordinary work of being children in a small California farming town, and who never made it to the next day. Anna Ortiz Lara, Mateo Ortiz Lara, Alesha Ortiz Lara. Their names belong in the public record. Their lives, however brief, were complete and real and valuable. In memory of these 3 children, and in honor of the true crime advocate community that shows up for cases like this one, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to the continued work of this channel. Case 8. Sherry Telness, 2019, Tulare County Superior Court. Porterville, California sits in Tulare County, in the southern portion of the Central Valley. It is a working-class city surrounded by agricultural land, a place with strong community ties and a history of resilience in the face of economic hardship. It is the kind of place where neighbors know each other, where children play in the streets and ride their bikes past irrigation ditches that run alongside cornfields and orchards. In 2019, one of those irrigation ditches became the site of a crime so horrifying that it permanently altered the way people in Porterville thought about the concept of maternal danger. Sherry Telness had 2 sons. Jackson Telness was 12 years old. His younger brother was 7 years old. On the day in question, Sherry Telness took both of her sons to an irrigation ditch near a cornfield in the agricultural outskirts of Porterville. She then dragged them into the water. Jackson Telness, 12 years old, died. He drowned in that irrigation ditch. His 7-year-old brother survived. The younger boy managed to get out of the water with critical injuries. Injuries that included signs of the physical force that had been used to drag him into the ditch in the first place. He was found by first responders and airlifted to a medical facility, where he was treated for injuries consistent with near drowning and physical trauma. The investigation that followed revealed something that made this case particularly chilling in retrospect. This was not the first time Sherry Telness had attempted to drown her children. Law enforcement discovered that Telness had a documented history of trying to drown her children in another state prior to the events in Porterville. The details of that earlier incident, the state in which it occurred, the circumstances, and the response by authorities in that jurisdiction are a matter of investigative record, though full public disclosure of all details has been limited by ongoing legal proceedings. What is documented and publicly known is this: there was prior conduct. There was a history. Somewhere, in another state, something had happened and had been responded to, or not responded to, in a way that did not prevent Sherry Telness from repeating that conduct in Porterville, California in 2019, with consequences that were lethal for 12-year-old Jackson. This element of the case raises questions that go beyond the individual circumstances of Sherry Telness and her sons. It raises questions about information sharing between states in child welfare cases, about the portability of risk assessments, about what happens when a family moves across state lines and leaves behind a history of documented concern that does not necessarily follow them in a way that triggers protective intervention in the new jurisdiction. Those are systemic questions that have no easy answers, but they are questions that Jackson Telness's death demands be asked. Sherry Telness was charged in Tulare County Superior Court with the murder of Jackson Telness and with the attempted murder of her younger son. The case was prosecuted by the Tulare County District Attorney's Office. Porterville is in one of California's most agriculturally and economically stressed counties, and the case puts significant demands on local law enforcement and prosecutorial resources. Jackson Telnaz was 12 years old. He was, by accounts from people in the Porterville community who knew the family, a child in the full, complicated, promising sense of that word, a boy who had years ahead of him, who was at the age where identity and interest and ambition begin to crystallize into the first outlines of the adult a child will become. He never got to become that adult. His younger brother survived. He was 7 years old. He came out of an irrigation ditch near a Porterville cornfield with injuries to his body and the kind of psychological wound that no 7-year-old should ever carry. He survived. He is, by the grace of emergency medical response and his own small body's refusal to give up, alive. That is something to acknowledge. It does not fix anything, but it is something. Sherry Telnaz is in the Tulare County court system. The case is a matter of ongoing record. Jackson Telnaz, 12 years old, Porterville, California. He deserved better. He deserved so much more. To everyone in the true crime advocate community who has stayed with us through 8 cases today, thank you. This is not easy material. Your presence here, your engagement with these stories, is an act of witness, a refusal to let these children's names disappear into the past. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this case or any other case we have covered today. Your comments help this community. Case 9. Amy Oliver. October 2020, Duval County, Florida. Henry Prisby was 3 years old. He had a father who loved him, a home in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, and the whole of a 3-year-old's universe laid out in front of him. All the small daily discoveries and fascinations and delights that fill the world of a toddler who is just beginning to understand how large and interesting everything is. He had his whole life ahead of him, which is another way of saying he had everything, because at 3 years old, your whole life is everything. In October of 2020, Henry Prisby was found unresponsive in the bathroom of his Jacksonville Beach home. When Jacksonville fire and rescue crews responded and broke into the locked bathroom to reach the child, they were met by his mother, Amy Oliver, 45 years old, who attempted to stab one of the rescue workers with a syringe. She came at the first responders who had come to save her son with a syringe in her hand, trying to prevent them from reaching him or from taking the syringe as evidence, or both. Henry Prisby was pronounced dead. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy ruled his death a homicide. The cause, a lethal dose of prescription sedatives that had been injected into the 3-year-old child. Henry Prisby had not accidentally gotten into medication. He had not suffered some unforeseeable medical event. He had been injected with a fatal amount of a sedative drug by his mother, deliberately, and he had died from it. Amy Oliver was arrested in January 2021 on a charge of first-degree murder. Investigators, working through the evidence gathered in the months between October 2020 and the arrest, determined that the injection that killed Henry Prisby had not been a spontaneous act carried out in a moment of lost control. The evidence indicated planning. Amy Oliver had thought about this before she did it. She had obtained the sedative. She had prepared the syringe. She had injected her 3-year-old son with a fatal dose and waited for it to work. And then she had been in that bathroom with him when the first responders broke the door down and came in to try to save a child she had already killed. She came at them with the syringe. There is something about that detail, the syringe raised against the firefighters who broke down a bathroom door to reach a dying toddler, that says something about the state of mind of Amy Oliver in that moment. Whether it was an attempt to prevent the syringe from becoming evidence, or an attempt to prevent the rescuers from reaching Henry, or some combination of both, or something else entirely that only Amy Oliver fully understands. The gesture of a mother attacking first responders with the instrument she used to kill her child is one that stays in the mind long after the other details have settled into their proper places in the timeline of the case. In July 2022, Amy Oliver pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The sentence was 40 years in prison, with credit for the 546 days she had already served since her arrest. She will be in her 80s before any question of release arises, if it ever does. Henry Prisby's father appeared in court and delivered a victim impact statement on behalf of his son. Victim impact statements are among the most humanizing moments in any criminal proceeding. The point at which the case stops being a collection of charges and evidence and legal arguments and becomes, undeniably and irrefutably, a story about a specific person who is gone and about the specific, irreplaceable shape of the absence they have left behind. Henry's father stood in that Jacksonville courtroom and spoke for a 3-year-old boy who would never be able to speak for himself about what had been done to him. Henry Prisby was 3 years old. He was found unresponsive in a bathroom in Jacksonville Beach, Florida, in October of 2020, having been injected with a lethal dose of sedatives by the woman who was supposed to protect him from every danger in the world. His mother attacked the people who came to save him. His father came to court to speak for him because he could not speak for himself. He was 3 years old. He had everything ahead of him, and it was taken from him deliberately by someone who planned it, in a locked bathroom in Jacksonville Beach. Amy Oliver planned what she did to Henry Prisby. That is the documented conclusion of the investigation. If stories like Henry's matter to you, please like this video, subscribe to True Crime Advocate, and leave a comment below. We have one final case, and it is among the most tragic and most mysterious on this entire list. Stay with us for Case 10. Case 10. Tanessa Hogan. June 22, 2021, Broward County, Florida. On June 22, 2021, in Lauderhill, Florida, a city in Broward County situated in the broad urban landscape of South Florida between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, the body of 9-year-old Destiny Hogan was found in a canal behind a condominium complex on Northwest 59th Way. Approximately 8 hours later, in the same canal, in the same body of water running behind the same complex, the body of 7-year-old Diaja Hogan was found. 2 sisters. The same waterway. Hours apart. The 2 little girls were the daughters of Tanessa Hogan, 36 years old, a licensed certified nursing assistant who lived in the Lauderhill area. A woman who had been trained in the professional care of human beings. A woman whose livelihood was built around keeping people alive. In the hours before the bodies of Destiny and Diaja Hogan were found in that canal, there had been a warning. It had been spoken aloud, in the presence of a neighbor, by Tanessa Hogan herself. Witnesses reported that before the discovery of the girls' bodies, Tanessa Hogan had been seen swimming in the canal, the same canal where her daughters would be found. And more than that, she had, according to witness accounts, approached a neighbor and asked whether the neighbor wanted her children to be baptized in it. She asked that question. She said those words. She offered her children's baptism in the water of a canal in Lauderhill, and the moment passed as moments sometimes do, observed but not understood, heard but not interpreted as the warning it was. Those children ended up in that canal. Destiny Hogan, 9 years old, was found first. Diaja Hogan, 7 years old, was found 8 hours later in the same water. 2 daughters of the same mother, pulled from the same canal on the same day, hours apart. When detectives were actively conducting the search for the girls on the day the bodies were found, they encountered Tanessa Hogan near the canal. The word encountered is the one that appeared in official reporting of the case, and it is a word that carries weight. She was not at home, not away, not unreachable. She was near the canal where her daughters were in the water. She was taken to a hospital following that encounter, in a condition that required medical attention. Tanessa Hogan was arrested 3 weeks later, on July 13, 2021, on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count for Destiny, 1 count for Diaja. She was formally charged with taking the lives of her 2 daughters, 9 and 7 years old, in Lauderhill, Broward County, Florida, on June 22, 2021. The motive in the case of Tanessa Hogan, at the time this documentary was prepared, remained under active investigation. The Lauderhill Police Department confirmed the investigation was ongoing and that motive had not been definitively established in the public record. That open question, that unanswered why, is one of the most difficult aspects of this case. Because Destiny and Diaja Hogan are gone, and their mother has been charged with putting them in that canal, and the specific and complete explanation for how a licensed nursing assistant, a professional caregiver, a mother, came to do what she is accused of doing to 2 little girls on a June morning in South Florida has not yet been fully laid out in a courtroom for the world to hear. What has been laid out is this. 9-year-old Destiny Hogan and 7-year-old Diaja Hogan were found in a canal in Lauderhill on June 22, 2021. Their mother had been seen swimming in that canal earlier. Their mother had offered their baptism in that water to a neighbor who was standing nearby. Their mother was found near the canal when detectives were searching for them. Their mother was charged with their murders 3 weeks later. Destiny Hogan was 9 years old. She was old enough to have developed a full and specific and beloved personality, old enough to have friends, to have things she was passionate about, to have a particular way of laughing or a specific habit that the people who loved her found endearing or infuriating or both. Old enough to have plans, however small and childlike, for what she wanted to do next week or next month or when she grew up. Diaja Hogan was 7 years old, 2 years younger than her sister, probably in 2nd grade, at the age when school starts to become its own world, a place with its own social dynamics and inside jokes and alliances that parents only partially understand. 7 years old. She had years and years ahead of her. They both did. They were found 8 hours apart in the same canal, behind the same condominium complex, on the same June day in Lauderhill, Florida. They were sisters. They were found in the water. The case of Tanessa Hogan sits unresolved in the legal sense as of this documentary's preparation. The charges are filed. The arrest was made. The trial that will eventually force the full account into the daylight of a public courtroom has not yet occurred. But Destiny and Diaja Hogan are not waiting for resolution. They are gone. They have been gone since June 22, 2021. The resolution, whatever form it takes, will be for the living. The 2 little girls in that canal got nothing from it. And that is the truth that runs through every single case on this list like a current that never stops. The verdicts come. The sentences are handed down. The reforms are legislated. The acts are named. The laws are passed. And the children are still gone. The children are always still gone. That never changes. It has never changed in a single case documented here, from Casey Anthony's Kaylee, found in a trash bag in the woods in December 2008, to Ariam Pierre, wrapped in fabric in a bedroom in Fort Pierce in May 2025, to Destiny and Diaja Hogan, pulled from a canal in Lauderhill on a June morning. The verdicts change. The sentences vary. The legal outcomes shift according to evidence and argument and the specific mechanics of the criminal justice process. But every single child on this list is still gone. That is the fixed, permanent, unchangeable truth at the center of all 10 of these stories. And it is the reason this documentary exists. Not to sensationalize, not to horrify for the sake of horror, not to exploit grief for entertainment, but to bear witness. To say the names. To ensure that the children who could not survive the people who were supposed to protect them are at least remembered by people who choose to remember them. Kaylee Anthony, Lazaro Figueroa, Lacey McCarty, Philip McCarty, Christopher Swist, Bo Skinecker, Calix Skinecker, Jordan Belliveau, Rillia Wilson, Ariam Pierre, Nubia Barahona, Henry Prisby, Destiny Hogan, Diaja Hogan. Say their names. Remember them. That is what we owe them, since we could not give them what they actually deserved, which was a life.